Okay, this is going to be on networking platforms, social media platforms, um, mainly to indeed advertise or, and promote something new that's coming out, but also to illustrate to some extent the fact that I do have a history with these. So even as I'm definitely not a techie, I am by no means a computer coder. Um, I respect that tremendously, but I just I've I remember dealing with DOS as a kid, and I'm like, oh, my mental tendency to reverse digits um, just never sounded like a good thing for anybody to try. Um, and So again, for me, my first experience in terms of networking at least some interactive platforms, as a person who's basically been disabled since childhood, in terms of all my medical conditions that I currently have, I really did have, uh, except for the concept of my spinal column has gotten progressively worse, and therefore with degenerative disc disease it just keeps on getting more and more severe, and therefore again it's not quite the same, but it's close enough, in terms of the fact that it's overall the same conditions, and everything else really is, again, it's the same, as when I struggled in terms of pain as a 6-year-old, changing my sleeping position to support my back, and now I need a heating pad and a back brace. So, some roughly 31 years later, it's the same basic thing. Um, so, which is why I almost found it comical. My husband recently mentioning the bunch of pillows that I use. I've started doing that really when I was about 7 years old, all to support optimum spinal alignment so that I could sleep best and wake up with the least amount, if not no pain. And for a while it worked, but again, kept getting worse. Um, but yeah, Prodigy, at that point, my spinal issues were basically under control again. And at that point, though, definitely there were days, albeit few, when I had trouble with walking. Then came Yahoo groups and chat groups, and Google groups, before MySpace, which most people regard as the first worldwide phenomenon. Then then after that, yep, Facebook. Then after that, I joined on YouTube, Twitter. Then at about 2006 or so, I started to notice my Facebook account getting definitely sizably censored. I got a couple of death threats that I reported that were really detailed, like they gave the method, they gave how they were going to get to me, and they gave why they supposedly felt that I deserved this. And yet I reported this, and the Facebook folks said, well, we did not find anything that violated the terms of community standards or service. So it's like, okay. And that's when this happened a couple of times, uh, over my just, being there. I mean, one of them was outright a threat over this because I refused to convert to a different religion. So, um, again, and then again, I noticed as well in terms of the main feeds, the stacking and restacking of posts whenever, or at least to some extent, when activist things would happen in terms of marches, in terms of rallies. It wasn't that severe at that point, but it and the increasing privacy violations that were being stated by the platform as the terms of service, along with how much memory it held in my device. And again, it was obvious at that point that, it was, the algorithms were really like blatant in terms of in your face. Not, again, it wasn't a total elimination of freedom, but I could see what was coming. And so at that point, I signed up to join MeWe because it promised censorship free. It promised that they would not do advertising. It promised that the only thing that they would ban in any way that you could report would be removed would be nudity / pornography of adults and children. And that's why they asked that, even if it was consenting adults, it not be posted. And I said, okay. And for a while, the only thing that was, and again, it wasn't technically advertisers, but it was advertisers. They would, in terms of charging for the platform use, it would be stickers and GIFs that were indeed brand names. And that's what would be charged extra as opposed to a free service. And I also noticed that some of my conversations with people that I was not in complete political alignment with, but who were very emotionally supportive towards me. The one or two people who literally would stay up all night and chatting with me when I was in 9 of 10 pain scale, and I couldn't really control it. And this person or two, they really helped, and I kept on seeing that I would get interfered with the platform. And that's one of the reasons that I really did begin to fade off of it, especially once my housing situation at least somewhat stabilized. That was destabilizing. That was when I became homeless, and then I went back on to Facebook because I needed resources desperately in terms of local resources. And even as bad as Facebook is in many ways, there's no physical phone book anymore, really, that does anything in any way. And therefore, everyone, even in terms of when you looked on the Yellow Book online for phones in terms of business directories, they sent you and forwarded you often to Facebook pages. And so I needed the local resources. Otherwise, I was like, I'm not going to find my way around. Again, because we had to move because we were homeless into a New York City shelter. So, because there wasn't any in New York County. And therefore, that's why I went back to Facebook. Because again, I had no real choice. Then I opened up a WordPress blog, in part because I wanted a longer place for my essays, in part because a college professor recommended it to me. And then for a brief time, I tried a platform called Minds. And the problem with that is that with my time on it, it seemed like it was very much meant for computer coders only. And which is to say, if you wanted to send any direct/instant messages to your friends, you needed to know how to deal with encryption. In terms of how to set it up yourself via I think they used in part virtual private networks and in part extra passwords. But even as it might have been easier and more possible for me to do on an app similar to MeWe and Facebook and Twitter, it was a huge memory hog in terms of mines on my phone, which was my only real, and has been for most of the last decade, my only real way to use the internet. So I couldn't really stay on it because it wasn't functional enough for me to use to really interact with people. It was fine to post occasionally, but I needed to actually interact with people in a more multi-level way. And I was not about to even try to learn to code at that point. I was still in the homeless shelter and dealing with lack of food, and I couldn't do it. There was just no way. And at that point, I as well began to use Twitter for more political stuff, as opposed to my originally opening up the account to follow sci-fi fandom things and performers from Star Trek and Doctor Who. And that's why I originally opened up a Twitter account, because in part, MeWe was, when I entered it, so small that there wasn't any real popular culture on it, and therefore I needed a pop culture outlet, or so I felt. At this point, I'm like, I don't even need that. I have my contacts, so, I'm going to fit into my niche, and it doesn't really matter anything else. And then through Twitter contacts after that, and again, within a couple of years of doing political stuff, by about 2015, 2016, I started to notice a heavy amount of censorship on Twitter. And the first set of posts that were blocked from loading repeatedly as I tried to post them, and this is why I made memes of them, and these were places with stable Wi-Fi signals, where everything else loaded just fine. So it wasn't a matter of, oh, well, but you had a bad signal. No. This was clear censorship. And it was on, of all things, how Medicaid actually worked. So it wasn't a matter of me trying to be really antagonistic. It wasn't a matter of, anything other than me trying to spread facts about what Medicaid and what Medicare really are and how they really work. And I shared, and that's part of why I originally as well went on Medium, because I got tired of that. And therefore, about 1,000 tweets got turned into, with some additional sources, a article on Medium about the medical systems in the USA. And then shortly thereafter, a bunch of my contacts suggested that I try Gab. And it wasn't long after that I was also hearing about Mastodon. Now, both platforms are very interesting. They both have very different feels to them, and I consider them basically inverted creatures of each other. Mastodon is a bunch of really nice people, mostly cloistered away into their own little cliques, and they don't really want to reach out, and therefore it's networking, but it's not. And they really heavily censor, but the bottom line is the outreach there is very, very difficult, and therefore, even as much as it's nice to occasionally go on there and chat with my close connections there, long term, it's not really a good outreach platform. It's got too many issues, like the cloistering and like a lack of, in many ways, many features that I really would like to have, not the least of which is a feed of my actual contacts, uh, which it doesn't really have. So that's, and I mean, I think there might be a way to fix up settings, but I've yet to find it. And therefore, it's not quite as bad in terms of minds of you needing to be a programmer, but it's not good. Now, as well, going back a step, I started to actually have a YouTube channel in about 2007 or so, because often it's just easier for me to talk. And that's when this YouTube channel began. And indeed, as I started to hear about people starting to get banned from YouTube, I started to fear that my own account, because I definitely posted on politics, would get destroyed. So I tried Vimeo. I think I even have still an account there. I'm not sure. I tried BitChute. BitChute, the main problem there was the cost. Just, I couldn't afford it, and it also, I believe, requires an app. Then I have also recently and finally gotten fully onto Odyssey to back up my YouTube videos. And I'm going to indeed start to more heavily post there as I continue YouTube. But the biggest thing I want to emphasize is that at this point, when I go back through all these platforms, and when I see what is being created with PanQuake, which is going to be a platform that I will be transferring to, I see this as, in some ways, a new beginning, but in some ways, a hybridization of all of the best features of at least most of the platforms that I've used. Okay, which is to say, Prodigy, okay, in terms of the fact that you'll be able to alter how things look on your screen. And you'll be able to actually get that one screen access, which indeed Prodigy, for the most part, in part because of dial-up internet in those days, they didn't want to try and maximize clicks, because then nothing would ever load, and therefore they just didn't want it, and it was antithetical to the process back then to have too many clicks, and therefore it just wasn't done. So you've got that, bringing that back in terms of the one screen that, again, Prodigy did have, and that was really wonderful and that I really miss. And then you're taking in the idea of your take of you being able to, as you could at least to some extent in Yahoo and Google and MySpace, your linkages to other networks. And you're adding that in with the concept. And again, one of the, as well, wonderful things about MySpace is that they really didn't discriminate against outside source links. Here they won't either. And in as much as, at least from what I saw, mine was definitely for coders, there's definitely a place for coders in this platform because it will be open source. And they're encouraging people to develop off of this to help it grow. And the thing as well, again, is that in as much as Gab has a philosophy of no censorship, we're gonna, we're no censorship, which, if it really held in terms of no censorship and no moderation, it would be tough, but it would be bearable. But I've been on Gab, it definitely is highly manipulated. And and I'm sorry, but if you try and say to me that it's not, no, sorry, I've seen it. It really is heavily manipulated, just like Twitter, just like MeWe. Um, Probably more the manipulation style of MeWe than Facebook, because there are different styles to the manipulation. I wish I could better define it, but there are. Um, and then because of the fact that it will indeed have you as the customer as opposed to the product, it will definitely provide a high level of value. And I understand people, although most of them are just plain cheap trolls, um, have said about, well, $5 a month. Why are you paying this? I just add to when you take platforms and you compare it with Facebook, Twitter, that you are required to have a working phone that can receive texts in order to use them and reopen them for whenever they are suspended or restricted, or just plain they decide that they need to verify your information / identity. Um, Take a look at the phone plans out there and tell me where you're going to get a phone that you could text on for $5 a month, and come back to me. I mean, really, because many times I've gone through months where I've not had an active smartphone because I couldn't afford it, and the money had to be prioritized elsewhere. And the thing is, I almost never make or receive calls on my phones. And this has been true for nearly a decade now. So as long as I can get into a hotspot again, or have home Wi-Fi, I now, when the transition to PanQuake is completed, I won't really need to have two smartphones in terms of one for me and one for my husband anymore. So you're talking about saving me on my absolutely cheapest. I have a $25 a month phone, and taking that to costing, again, about $5. So so that's why I have a real issue. In addition to, again, the value of your privacy, your security, your anonymity, if you want it, them not selling off your data, you owning your data, full transparency, being told if you are in any way moderated, because they do not allow illegal activities on there, why you have been. So, and given a clear explanation of it, okay? Not like the nonsense I get on Twitter all the time, or Facebook that I used to get on all the time, but a real clear explanation. And might I add, MeWe was really kind of funny because, in some ways, because he claimed at first that even though they banned pornography and nudity, they also said that we don't moderate, so that they don't censor. So so it was like, it really was almost a comedy routine from the get-go, and I guess I should have known better. But at that point, I was really desperate to get away from Facebook because I saw what was happening, and I'm like, oh God. So I left, and that's the thing, is that we really do in many ways need a new beginning. I'm currently on, my main handle on Twitter is quote-unquote limited features, and ironically, when I was talking in DMs with a mutual of mine who works in the computer field as well, IT, she was mentioning that, because I'll be a part of the beta tester, she's like, well, and this part was when they shut down our direct messages to each other, when she said, if I manage, in terms of me worried about destroying it, she's like, if you destroy the beta, it's good because that'll help them, fix the problem then. So this is where we're at in terms of the degree of censorship that's going on. And that's why I wholeheartedly encourage you to indeed sign on, join in support. Note that if it really is a hardship for you in any way, there will be redistributed and hardship memberships given. But again, either way, I understand both perspectives. Some people are, even when we're poor, we're like, I don't want to take this for free. I don't. And some people are of the ilk of, I have no, thank you. I need this. Both perspectives are valid. Do what you need to. But please at least consider joining us on this new venture, because we really do need new beginnings. We need to talk more to each other as opposed to at each other. And we need to get away from the manipulation that is so high level and so blatant at this point, to some safety for renewal. Thanks.